Welcome everyone to this Gemba 360 special legal compliance session on the Victoria's new lockdown restrictions, specifically focused on a number of hotspot suburbs. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director of the law firm Kaizen Synergy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session is being recorded all the way up to the question and answer part of the webinar this morning, where we will open up the phone lines and your computer lines, and happy to stay on the line and answer any questions that people might have. The resources that we use today, the PowerPoint slides, the webinar, and also other state government issued documents, we will be circulating to all of the attendees this afternoon, just to make sure that you have these resources available for you, and you can use any or part of these materials. With it, the Victorian State Government COVID-19 response to new stay-at-home orders comes into effect at 11:59 today, and restrictions will be in place until at least 29th of July 2020. That said, there are a number of questions that agencies have had in response to this, and I'll come to those in a minute, but also how services are to be run, what impact it does have for staff, for volunteers, for services, a whole range of issues these now raise. So we will be covering those particular questions off today. And certainly, if you do have any questions, happy for you to raise these as we go throughout the session. I am supported by a number of staff from our Gemba 360 support desk who are online to assist with any questions that people might have. And also, we will, as I mentioned, open up the phone lines at the end of the session as well. So just to go back, the areas that we're going to specifically cover off is where does it apply? For clarification, why is it actually needed? What is the public health policy decision around this? What are the rules that are being issued in terms of people located within the hotspot areas? And what if you do need to travel into those hotspots, whether you're a staff member for a service agency or whether you have family in there? What do you need to do if you need to travel into them? What can you expect? We're also going to look at some case examples. So if you are a community service-based organisation, and we've got a large number of agencies joining us today, whether you're based in these areas, whether you provide aged care services based and you're physically located in these areas, or if you provide services into those areas as well too. Keeping in mind that there is talk now that neighbouring suburbs may also be subject to future lockdowns. This is not just limited potentially to the hotspots that have been identified. We're also going to just look at some other related case examples, specifically around do schools return that are located within these areas? What if you have clients are located within this area, but your agency presence isn't located within those areas? What if staff or volunteers are located in these hotspot areas? Can they come to work or stay at home? What are the rules around those? Also, what if you need to engage contractors, whether those be tradespeople, and if there's a need to go into those areas, the hotspot areas, on behalf of your agency? And an example of this may be support workers. It may include also tradespeople for housing and other maintenance type services. So we're just going to really work through some of these questions in today's session. As always, if you do have any questions, by all means, you can raise these at the end of the session, as I mentioned, and we will stay on the line to answer any and all questions. Just before then, we will stop the recording to protect people's privacy and the likes. If you also wanted to raise questions, you can also post those in our chat group as well too, that's located here. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners from where you all join us from, not only in Victoria, but also around the country as well. A couple of things I did, housekeeping things for agencies that utilize the Gemba 360 dashboard. It is important just to be aware that we have also updated your disaster and COVID-19 plan, policy and pandemic forms, specifically around the disaster module. With that, many of you have seen this. I will just jump into it and show you where it's located. We have done some updates based on the Commonwealth's COVID Safe Plan, and also included as part of this the three-step plan. And if I just jump in for agencies that utilize this as well too, you can access the Gemba, your own Gemba dashboard through the disaster module, and that will bring up the key projects, which I'm just showing you here. And this will have specific activities that you need to do, and much of the topics we're going to be covering off here is actually also loaded in. For agencies joining us for the first time as well too, this material will also be circulated through our materials today as well. So it is part of ensuring that you have the right information at the right time, and the checklists are available to manage your service within your agency. But you can find that in your Gemba 360 dashboard under the COVID disaster and pandemic module, and by simply clicking on the specific projects that you can see here, we'll actually open that up and list those particular items for you to work through as well. And that is something that we can come back to if you like a bit later. So let's actually have a look. The Victorian stay-at-home measures for specific suburbs will be coming into effect at 11:59 p.m. today. In looking at not only the recommendations that we're making, but also the rules, looking at how it affects services and agencies, especially community service agencies, and where clients may be located in these hotspots and your agency may be within the hotspot area or located out. Our process for actually putting together this material is to look at, firstly, the legislation of the order that being issued by Parliament, looking at the public health and wellbeing legislation, looking at the emergency health legislation, then effectively looking at some of the Commonwealth government policy documents, as well as also the state government, in this case Victoria, issued guidelines. From there, what we've actually taken into account is to look at some specific self-assessment rules that you should be conscious of, and also using the quality improvement framework, the audit standards that's relevant to your agency, specifically looking at the governance, looking at the national quality standards for different agencies, but taking really a quality audit measure around this of saying compliance, then self-assessment for agencies, and then really allowing yourselves to use these slides to identify areas of improvement will actually lead towards your, what we call the COVID Safe Plan, that you can implement within your agency. So going through, let's just cover and step this through part by part. Effectively, yesterday there was a statement from the Premier of Victoria, and again we will send this material out for yourselves as well as a reference guide around effectively locking down certain hotspot suburbs. And of course the media has picked up on this around what it means or what it could mean for agencies. We're not going to go into what it could mean for agencies and people and talk about individual streets and how there might be one side of the street maybe within a postcode and another side of the street may not. We're not going to go down that particular discussion point unless it comes up in the question and answer part of the webinar. What we're going to look at is the specific rules and procedures that your agency staff, volunteers and clients should be aware about. So effectively, Victoria has introduced stay-at-home orders for a series of coronavirus hotspot suburbs. And this was done in a bid to contain a unacceptably high number of new cases that have been detected in the past few days. Now, what is interesting about this is that Victoria has actually bypassed Italy on the infection rates on a per capita basis. So it actually gives you some idea of what the definition of unacceptably high in context actually means. Now, there are 10 postcodes, 36 suburbs, some over 300,000 people approximately affected by this. And what it means is that these people cannot leave home unless for essential reasons. Police will be having patrols and set up checkpoints in and out of areas. People entering should only be local residents, but I'll come to that as well too, especially for community service-based agencies and agencies providing aged care. If you're leaving today for holidays from these areas, then that's okay, but you will not be able to do so if you want to do that tomorrow, day after, or so on for the next 4-week period. So effectively from 11:59 on Wednesday, the 1st of July today, residents in the following 10 postcodes will be restricted from leaving the house except for essential purposes. These hot zones, as they're being called by the government, will be required to return to stage 3 stay-at-home restrictions until at least the 29th of July. Now, the public health modelling that is being used to identify these areas has been identified as really a 3-step process. And with this, we have included this as part of the recommendations that we're going to make for your agency. So the first step is to identify the priority of what the government has done is effectively 3 things. First step is to identify priority local government areas with more than twice the state case rate. Second part is that there was will be a review of all the postcodes within that local government area. And the third will be to identify priority suburbs with more than 5 cases and a greater rate of 20 per 100,000 people. Now, why we're going to look at including part of these into the recommendations is to actually give and suggest that your agency look at travel restrictions in and out, that is in line with state government policy directions, with the exception of staff that may be going in to provide services or for the essential purposes to visit family and the like, if that's what's required. But equally, if people are traveling out of those suburbs, and they may be doing so to either get essential services such as health services that your agency may provide, or aged care services or care support services. So there may well be a reason for people to travel out and actually visit your agency. Now, part of that, straight up, that I will say to your one of the recommendations we are making is that agencies actually ask staff to record whether they have visited any of the hotspot suburbs or whether they have come into close contact with someone from those hotspot suburbs. This is for an interim period to match the state government's response for a 4-week period. The reason for this is to ensure that if there is extended outbreaks or the likes, that your agency is covered for that. It may well be that you're also screening clients that reside within those hotspots, which we will come to as well too. And again, that from tomorrow, you actually have these types of own screening processes in place. So effectively, the map that is covered by these 10 postcode areas and some 30 plus suburbs is this map here. And we've actually taken this directly from Channel 9. We've had a look at some of these diagrams, and this is one of the ones that are very, very clear. And we recognize Channel 9 News Service for this particular diagram as well too. With that, there is parts of this that you'll want to look at and reflect upon your own policy areas to ensure that staff travelling in and out of these areas or clients located within these areas, that effectively you start to screen these particular service areas, because it is important that your agency identify potential risks that you may need to look at. And I'll come to those in the next few slides. So the Victorian stay-at-home lockdown measures, effectively, what are the rules around this? Now, for people within these postcodes, effectively, as I mentioned, the reason that this is in is because currently Victoria has a higher infection rate than Italy on a per capita basis. This means that those residents will only have 4 reasons to leave their homes, and these are included here. It is something that we've seen, all of us have experienced who reside in Victoria, back to stage 3 restrictions. That is that people can only leave their homes for shopping, food and supplies, for care and caregiving, for exercise, and for study or work if you cannot do it from home. Now, this also applies to everyone considering travelling into the restricted areas. So that includes staff within your agencies travelling into these postcodes, and that means it applies to them as well too. So in the event, and this is coming directly from the Premier of Victoria's media statement as well too, which we'll also circulate as part of our resource and reference information in today's webinar slides. So this means that those people will only have 4 reasons to travel in. That is for food shopping for and food supplies, care and caregiving, exercise and study or work if you can't do it from home. Now, with the operations of businesses in these affected areas means that there are temporary closures right through till the 29th of July. So cafes, restaurants and hotels will only be able to provide takeaway meals and beverages. Gyms will have to close, but there will be, and the government have instituted that there will be urgent grants of $5,000 for eligible businesses through business support funds, grants, or a payroll tax refund as well too. Now, to be quite clear around the businesses that are affected in these areas, there will be activity, facility, and venue restrictions in restricted postcodes. And these are covered here in these next slides. Restaurants and cafes can open to serve takeaway and home delivery only. Pubs, bars, clubs, nightclubs will be closed. They can offer takeaway food and alcohol only. Beauty and personal care services will be closed apart from hairdressers and barbers. Libraries and community venues, and we will talk about this in a little bit as well too, will be closed except for essential public support services such as food banks. Religious ceremonies and private worships can only occur online, and restrictions on the number of people who can attend a wedding and funerals will also be in place, going back to stage 3 restrictions. Now, in addition to this, indoor sports centres, gyms, training facilities and pools will be closed. Community support training competitions cannot occur within a restricted postcode. If you live in an impacted area, you cannot participate in community sport elsewhere. So that means that even if the community sport is actually run on a neighbouring suburb that's outside the hotspot and you reside within that, or your agencies participating in the sport, you will need to screen where your activity participants are actually coming from. And if you're providing community services as well too, you should be undertaking this screening as well. In addition to that, galleries, museums, historic sites, zoos, outdoor amusement parks and arcades, play centres, indoors, drive-in cinemas, concert venues, theatres, auditoriums, arenas, stadiums, casinos and gaming will be closed. This also includes outdoor sports facilities, personal training, outdoors can occur, but with a limit of 2 participants plus the instructor. And holiday accommodation and camping will be closed except for those who reside there for emergency accommodation or for work purposes. And again, we'll come to that in the next few slides as well. So let's have a look at some of the case examples that you may need to find yourselves, that you may need to consider and also find yourselves in. Now, firstly, it's a couple of general remarks around this. Will schools remain open in the lockdown suburbs? At this stage, the answer is yes, that expect that schools will return from 13th of July. And I know that we've got a number of agencies that provide education services across these hotspots areas. So schools will remain open in the lockdown suburbs. In addition to that, other questions that people have asked is, can I visit my partner if we're on separate sides of the lockdown border? And what about clients as well? Now, yes, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, couples living separately are able to visit each other at home. This follows also the stage 3 restrictions, where the definitions of couples was taken at, I'm going to say, the broader definition, not historical kind of definitions. So it can be couples under the revised and updated modern definition as well too. So in the event that you want to visit partners and you reside on separate sides of the lockdown border, then you can also, that can be allowed. And this obviously applies for clients as well too. There may be extenuating circumstances for health and well-being that equally partners and clients may need to visit their other half, so to speak, in relation to providing services as well too. The other part that I will mention was around, can tradespeople and contractors provide services? Now, with this, an example of this is where you may run a housing service, residential services. You may need, as part of your own agency, whether it be in aged care or health or community services, essential type services, or you might have clients that need a service to be provided. And when I say trades, I'm also including support workers as well too, as a contractor. Now, with that, the answer is yes. The department has instructed that its best is always to minimize physical contact where possible, including paying with a direct bank transfer or contactless payment. In addition to that, what we also recommend, and we'll put this in our recommendations, which you'll find at the end of this presentation, is that you actually screen your clients for symptoms, and it may well be that the contractor or tradesperson needs to actually make contact with the client to undertake a screening process before actually visiting that client's site and the likes. The other question that agencies have asked, and this will impact on our discussions a bit further on, in terms of what if our agency is located outside the current hotspot area, or if you have a situation where you need to place a client outside the hotspot area and support them, but what happens if that hotspot area expands? So one of the questions that has come up in the last couple of days by agencies contacting us is, will the lockdown eventually be extended to other suburbs? Now, quite possibly the answer is yes. And according to Premier Daniel Andrews, if you are sick, you cannot go out. The only thing you should be doing if you are sick is getting tested. Now, with that, it's to prevent the spread and also growth of the hotspot area to neighbouring suburbs. But there is the potential that you should prepare that the lockdown may well be extended to neighbouring hotspot areas. Now, within this, for community service agencies, some of the questions that come up is operating within the hotspot areas and how can we actually support clients? Well, there are a number of documents that you can rely on. There's in Victoria, there's the Victorian Community Services Sector document, and effectively community service providers can continue to safely operate in these areas. There are currently no additional restrictions in place. There is also no change to the current advice about service delivery arrangements as well too. This also includes aged care providers, and again, the reference document by the Victorian State Government is around the Plan for Victorian Aged Care Services. There are two important updates in version 2, which are highlighted in red in the document, and that is that visitors and how to implement the care facility directions needs to be considered. You also should be considering influenza vaccinations requirements, and also latest information about the Commonwealth divisions on PPE, and also in-reach pathology rapid collection and testing should equally be considered as part of the service within your agency, especially if you're providing services into or within the hotspot areas. What we are also recommending for agencies is to ensure that your COVID safe plan is updated. And there are a number of measures, and we've covered some of these in past webinars, and we will send you the link to our past webinars as a reference to this as well too. Now in this, there are a series of checklists that you should be looking at. There are 4 that we've covered off. One is around requirements for keeping workers safe. There is the requirements for social distancing, which still should be implemented. Requirements for keeping your workplaces clean and how to spread the stop of COVID-19. And also requirements for workers, customers, health and hygiene, especially if you're now operating within these hotspot regions effectively as of 11:59 tonight. And so with it, you can find these on your Gemba 360 dashboard, as I mentioned at the start of this session, and this will give you the checklist that you need already, especially if you are operating within these hotspots. Equally, if you are neighboring, then again, you may find that you'll need to utilize these to look at conducting your business, and also some of the critical messaging that you should be looking at. I won't cover these off in too much detail because there are more reference information for yourselves to use, but effectively working through these sections around conducting your business in terms of what the messages are from a social distancing, public health record keeping, and practicing good hygiene is stuff that we have covered off in previous sessions. Equally, you also need to consider conditions of entry though. If you are operating near or within, and you're also delivering services into these hotspots areas, then you really should be considering ways in which your business and agency can safely control the flow of clients in and out of the service. This is particularly important for aged care services and also community service organizations. You may restrict specific visiting times as well too, or you may limit that into a particular room only, which a lot of agencies have already done. And we've made those recommendations in this particular set of slides. There are also looking at customer or client interaction as well too, and managing those to ensure social distancing is managed. And of course, things like completing services and payments as well. One of the key important parts around this is around communal facilities and spaces. Again, the social distancing rules apply if you're sitting outside the hotspot areas. That has not changed. The issue being that unless you're an essential service, being community services and aged care and health services being an example of those that a lot of agencies have joined us on this webinar on, is that you need to manage your facilities and spaces, especially if you're located within these areas. And Safe Work have the checklist, which we've included as part of this resource pack. Equally, what you should be looking at is managing egress and emergency evacuation as well. As part of that, your agency needs to consider your egress and emergency evacuation procedures, given now the increased restrictions around the COVID-19 in the hotspot suburbs. And equally, managing the training of that should be occurring, if it hasn't already, to ensure that staff are aware of each of these sections from A through to G of what I've just mentioned before. And also what's important is that you keep up to date with the public health officer's directions. What we will be sending around this is effectively covering through the specific requirements that your agency should be considering very carefully. With it, as these restrictions and these timelines for the next 4 weeks either are managed to the 29th of July, or if they are extended, we will be running regular webinars to cover your legal compliance obligations and ensure that your agency is kept up to date. So that is something that you can keep up to date through the public health directions on. In terms of reviewing your risk management plan, of course, it's about managing the restricted lockdown measures. Effectively, as I've mentioned, those 4 reasons now apply, especially if you're traveling into those areas, or also if services are being provided or family or friends actually reside in those areas. Those 4 reasons effectively apply. What we have also suggested is that if you are maintaining your up-to-date COVID safe plan, that you do provide a statement of compliance across your business, whether that be printed and signed and dated, especially on your business entrance as well too, because it's important to demonstrate compliance to the local community that you are following the specific COVID safe plan directions. Now, on that, as I mentioned, on the Gemba 360 dashboard, there is the checklist that you can work through to make sure that if you are an agency that is residing or within the hotspot areas or effectively in neighbouring suburbs, then those checklists are equally on there. What we have also included as part of this is a checklist for specific agencies where staff may be needing to provide services into those areas and ensuring that you've got key requirements in place. Now, at minimum, what we have also looked at is the Commonwealth directions around what employers need to do to reduce the risk of COVID-19. This is also consistent from the Australian AHPPC, which is the committee that advises the Commonwealth Health Department and consists of all the chief medical officers from around the country. So we're not reinventing the wheel here or making own policy recommendations. This has effectively come directly from the Commonwealth, and we acknowledge that source. Equally around that, the checklist, and we've utilized this as part of your own checklist to give to you, and it is available on these PowerPoint slides. So there are some 14 different recommendations that agencies and employers should be doing to reduce the risk of COVID-19. And this is now particularly important given the hotspot measures that are in place. So finally, our key recommendations and take-home messages that your agencies should be considering as part of this process. Effectively, it is this. In alignment with the Victorian government directions, there are only 4 reasons. Firstly, there are only 4 reasons for people to travel in. There are equally only 4 reasons for people to travel out. Now, if you have clients, staff, or volunteers, for example, based in these areas or traveling in or out of those areas, then what we are suggesting is that you update your policies to include travel restrictions into and out of these areas with the exception of those 4 main reasons. Equally, we also suggest that because it is the school holidays, that you do have a screening process for staff, volunteers, and clients that are traveling to and also from hotspot areas. And I think that's based on Premier Daniel Andrews' 3-step assessment of how they've actually come to this particular decision. And again, this is what we are recommending that your agency look at, because in this way, you're actually being able to proactively look at your own staffing requirements, if you have volunteers or support workers that are traveling into these areas, and also protecting the services that you deliver to clients. Equally, as I've mentioned, identify which clients are located within the catchment areas as well too. And reason being for that is in order to protect either clients, but also your staff as well too. What we've also suggested is that as part of this, when contacting staff and also clients that are located in these areas, also ensure that you provide regular newsletters, where it may well be through SMS, email, or your website, or it may even be through phone support as well too. With that some of the phone supports, SMS, emails, and website depends on the client demographics that you do have. It is acknowledged that there is a knowledge gap by many, many people within these hotspot areas because of, it may well be, language barriers, and also current messaging from the department may not have actually got through to certain client and population groups. So it may well be that within your agency, especially for translated-based services, it may well be important that you look at the messaging that you're providing to your clients within these hotspot areas. We do recommend, as part of that, that may well open some medical legal areas that you should equally consider as well. And if you are translating messages into different languages, we equally suggest that you look at a back translation. And if you are doing that back translation, I mean back to English, by a separate person, is a method that we've used within our law firm, because that way you can then assess whether the messaging that you're getting through is consistent with the messaging coming out as well too. And also looking at how you manage inquiries within your agency. The difficulty around this is that there are hotspot suburbs and that are being locked down. The issue around this and the challenge is where services need to be provided into hotspot areas, the travel for access for clients. So a lot of these inquiries in terms of the client flow, whether that be that clients need to visit your agency, or whether staff may need to go into those into those hotspots. Some agencies have actually considered that they actually have specific staff, designated staff for the next 4 weeks that are actually allocated to particular areas to deliver a specific set of services. That may not work for a number of agencies, but for some agencies, it may well work, and it may well be the best way to manage this process. That said, we will open up the phone lines and computer lines and down the line to answer any questions that you might have. While our support desk is just getting ready again to do that, I will mention, if you do have any questions after this webinar, or you are listening to it on our YouTube channel, then by all means, please contact us on support@gemba360.com by email, or you can phone us at 1300 360 360.